welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week we have Zachary here to tell us about their game, I Could Do This in My Sleep. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I didn't want to sleep on this game because you sent me the press release and sent me the information about it, and I wanted to come on and talk to you because it was a really interesting concept. The idea of the setting and the inspiration felt a bit dystopian, Black Mirror-esque, and so I'm really glad you're here to share more about the game. Before we dive into it, though, I'm going to be nosy and talk about you and your background and history of games, as I always do. So I'll start with the classic question of, do you remember the first game that you played?
Yeah, I do. So I'm kind of a little bit of a newcomer, I guess, to this hobby in a way.
Okay.
The first full-blooded TTRPG I played was 5th edition D&D.
Classic. Classic.
And it was Lost Mines of Phandelver.
There we go.
So literally the box set.
Yeah, got it. How long ago was that then?
Oh God, 2016, 17? No, it must have been.
Oh, okay, so still like a good decade or so.
Yeah.
A good decade of playing games. I thought you were going to say it's been like the last couple of years or something, by the way you said.
6 months.
No, I think a decade doesn't mean you're a newbie to TTRPGs. I think that's a very solid CV of games. But yeah, obviously started with D&D, which like a lot of people do. It's the most popular game out there. But when I look through the kind of games you've made and written, they don't feel hugely D&D like. So did you branch out into the indie things from there?
Yeah. So for a while I've been trying to build. I played D&D, loved it, but had some issues with it and wanted to try and build my own system. And after spending like a couple of years working on this kind of gothic horror thing that I'd had going, I look back on it and realized that I basically just like reinvented 4th edition and 3.5 and kind of made all these things together.
Right, yeah.
And I think what I found was like, I'm someone that definitely needs a deadline and a project and a bit of pressure to get something done. It's very easy in a way if you've got an idea to just kind of keep working at it and never really produce anything from that. But a couple of years ago, I completely by chance stumbled across this game jam that DriveThruRPG runs every year called PocketQuest.
Okay.
Which, like the premise, they have a theme every year. That year it was space, and it was, you've got 2 months, make a 20-page game, here's the theme, go.
Okay.
And as long as you get it done, we'll help promote it and stuff like that. So to me, that was perfect. That was just like, okay, that's a small, manageable thing with a deadline. I know I can hit that. But again, like my Protomancer was the game that I ended up creating for that, which is a kind of card game. But that was the third iteration that I went through. The first thing was very much a traditional, slightly D&D-esque. You're going on an adventure in space and there are monsters and there are things to fight and things to do, but it was highly derivative and didn't really it didn't excite me while I was working on it.
Okay.
So then my next step was like, I'm going to try and pin down more of a theme, something that's a little bit more odd, a little less rote in a way. I was like, okay, what if you're not an adventurer? What if you're like working in a space dock and you're just dealing with like the ships that come through and stuff like that, and you've got kind of resource management and stuff? And that was fun for a bit, but then I also ran into some problems with like 20-page limit for something which is all about engineering and requires like hundreds of different spaceship parts and weapons and things like that, and it just didn't fit. So I kind of literally with like 3 weeks to go, just had this brainwave of, I've always wanted to make a deck builder. Can I do a deck builder that's an RPG? Can I do it in 3 weeks? It's like, well, yeah, if I pare it down to like a limited set of content. And so I ended up building this thing that has no dice, has a deck of cards instead, which is not particularly radical, but trying to build something that is very mechanical focused, plays around with that idea of the way that probability is completely different with a deck of cards than it is with dice, and just try to figure out how that feels as a player. And it ended up being this sort of sci-fi dungeon crawler, a little bit of resource management, a little bit of a survival thing that was like quite radically different from the kind of stuff I'd played up until that point. But realized that was actually something that was quite important to me as a designer, was just like working on slightly odd mechanics, slightly kind of non-traditional settings and things like that, and just trying to pull all these pieces together.
Yeah. And that was your first kind of project that you put out there for other people to try. So if someone else is, you know, thinking they want to give it a go and is doing something like PocketQuest as an excuse, what kind of advice or guidance would you give to them trying it out for the first time?
It's a bit of a cliche, but like, make stuff that you want to play. Don't aim for like commercial success, particularly if you're a first timer, because realistically you're not going to get there on the first attempt.
Sure.
But
yeah.
If you make something that you enjoy playing, there's going to be someone else out there that enjoys it as well. Project Mantle, like I said, it's the first thing that I made. I think so far it's actually the most successful as well. It's the most kind of weirdly niche one, but it's also, I think, kind of because of that, it's not competing in the same space as, it's not trying to compete in the same space as like DnD and Pathfinder and whatever else. If someone likes what you're doing and it's out there somewhere, eventually someone will find it. And if you enjoy it, someone else will. That's kind of the main takeaway, I think.
And that's great. I love that. Well, that's some solid advice. Well, okay, so we've kind of established that you started with PocketQuest and that with your first game, and also it comes back full circle because I Could Do This in My Sleep was also done for PocketQuest 2025. So why don't you tell us what the theme was and then introduce us to what you chose to do with I Could Do This in My Sleep?
Yeah, so the theme this year is dreams and nightmares, which is a little bit vague, but I quite like that. There's been a huge range of like people that take it very literally, and others that take it as purely a metaphor. It's like, oh, what's your dream date, or what's your dream job, or what's like a nightmare that haunts you? Not necessarily a physical nightmare, but I'd had this idea kicking around in the back of my head for probably years. Back when I used to do sort of 0-hour contracts and getting home at 1 a.m, and the nightmare commute and all that kind of thing, of what if we were just asleep for your job? Like, what if you don't actually even need to be awake? Does that change anything? And I made some notes, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I could do this as like a novel, maybe I could do a short serialized fiction. And it's been like just a collection of notes in the back of a journal for years at this point. It's been steadily growing. And so when this PocketQuest came along with its theme, I was like, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I've had in my back pocket, no pun intended, for years to work on now. So I'll make it as a game.
Yeah.
Which I seem to keep doing this, because I did this with my PocketQuest entry the year before as well. Was exactly the same thing. Was I'd had this idea just in the back of my notebook, and it just happened to coincide with something.
Just needed the push to make it and do it.
Yeah,
like you needed that deadline to make it happen.
Exactly right. Yeah. So the kind of general premise is that it's a near future, present day. It's a little ambiguous of the time period, but more or less present day Britain, with a level of technology that's a little bit more, I hesitate to use the word advanced, because advanced has this kind of moral connotation to it, which we'll get into that in a minute, but a little more kind of capable than what we have today. And the main kind of central part of this is the NRAM chip, which is Nocturnal Regulated Activity Mode.
Okay.
Which is like a little microchip that fits in the brain, and you can be programmed to work through your sleep. And there's a drug that you've got to take in order to make that work.
Okay.
And it's kind of become like a standard. So it doesn't get like deep into the history of this in the book, but there's a kind of suggestion that like this was a little tech bro gimmick kind of thing. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could be more productive in our sleep? And then naturally that kind of gets wrapped up in the economy. And now everyone kind of has to have this and has to work 16-hour days just to survive. But as a player character, there is an option to be someone that doesn't have the enram chip. But assuming you are, you get this glitch where you get woken up in the middle of your sleep when you're supposed to be working, and you get your mind flooded with images and thoughts and feelings from like 1,000 other people around the city around you. And once you've made those connections, as kind of impromptu connections with so many people around you who are in the same position as you, what do you do with that information? From my perspective, if I was on the receiving end of that, I think I'd find it extraordinarily difficult to just go back to day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I think we live in a very disconnected time, both in terms of like grand national politics being quite isolationist, but also on a personal level, there seems to be continually this strong push towards individualization.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do with this was kind of push towards more of a community vibe with it, I suppose. And so the technology just kind of like backfiring and accidentally bringing people together when that's the opposite of what it's been trying to do was just this really interesting starting point for me.
Yeah, I really like that. What sort of like media references did you have for this? Because like when I was saying I first read it, I was like, oh, this feels a little bit Black Mirror or something like that. But what sort of things inspired you when you were writing all those notes in the back of that book?
Yeah, Black Mirror was pretty big at the time, so that's definitely one of them. There's the obvious stuff like Neuromancer. I guess like a little bit of Akira as well. There's a reference in there. There's someone doing the bike slide on a delivery moped.
Fab.
Black Mirror is a bit of a weird one because it was huge at the time, but I'm much more a fan of like the earlier Black Mirror where it's a bit more subtle. And it really felt a bit more targeted, a bit more kind of like British in a way. And I keep saying that, oh, I could do this in my sleep. It's a very British game. It's set in Britain.
Yeah.
In some ways it is. In other ways, I think it's quite universal. But a lot of it sort of comes from my observations working and just kind of seeing how work and technology relate.
Yeah.
And that like I can only talk about my own experiences in that sense. So it feels very kind of closed off and quite like it's location.
Sure.
But
yeah. No, definitely.
It really is.
No, it makes sense. It's one of those things like write what you know, isn't it? It's so that's what you can put out. But the great thing about role-playing games is other people will pick it up and tell stories that relates to their life and experiences. So it could go somewhere totally different. Yeah. That's really interesting. The setting was what really drew me in. It seemed really interesting. And so I'm glad, you're here to kind of share and talk about that a bit more. Speaking about the game, let's dig into kind of the mechanics and how we actually sit down to play. So if this concept for people listening like me kind of drew you in, let's talk about how we sit down to play. So I guess if we start out with the characters, so like you said, you're people with this chip and you're suddenly awakened to it. But who will we be playing and what does character creation look like?
Yeah. So we don't have classes, but you do have a kind of background that you build up from a few different parts. You've got an occupation. You've got a selection of contacts, people that you know in the world. You've got hopes and fears and aspirations and things like that. There's a table you can pick from it. Personally, I really like to roll against the tables. I find it way more interesting to just like discover a character through rolling, particularly when you get like really opposing pieces of information. Like I rolled up a character once whose the thing that they most needed was to have companionship, but the thing that they were most afraid of was being betrayed.
Okay, yeah.
Two really kind of interesting poles that kind of play off each other and things like that. Most of the occupations are like pretty working class people. Like it goes from you can be just completely unemployed, you can be a delivery driver, you can be like a construction laborer. If you're rolling, there's like a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to be some like company exec that starts with a load of money, but also starts with one extra person who's gunning for them.
Okay, to balance it out, fair enough, yeah.
Yeah. And then your contacts, there's kind of a 50-50 split between ones that are going to be a kind of narrative benefit to you, who might be able to open some doors, might be able to help you out of a sticky situation. And then those that are going to be kind of a narrative hindrance, but come with a mechanical benefit as well. So you might have like someone that's trying to extort you for money, and like the game master can just throw this guy in every now and again, and you've got to deal with them. But on the flip side, you're really good at talking your way out of difficult situations. But you're going to have to be.
Yeah.
And then there's like a handful of different types of chip that you can get. So there's a little thing that I kind of brought in with the way that experience points work is that you've got common experience points, but then you've also got specific experience points. And your common XP works exactly the way you'd expect. You gain XP for doing stuff, you can spend it on getting new features for your character. And then specific XP is the same, but it targets certain skills, and it's rewarded for how do you deal with a problem? Or do I shoot my way through something, or do I try and talk my way through it, or do I rely on scientific knowledge or historical knowledge and things like that? And you're going to get different types of XP that reinforce certain aspects of your character. You're not strictly tied into it because you've always got that common XP, so you can always pick what you want to do. But the more you kind of push yourself down a certain path, the more that's going to be reinforced for your character, and the more it's going to kind of come up in play.
Okay. And when you're talking about experience points, is this like, so there's a game intended for like kind of campaign long-term play opposed to like one-off sessions?
Yes, I'd say that possibly one of the more interesting ways of playing it is you take like a series of one-shots and you just take like the same character through. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a single thread for that character. You could go, oh, hey, I'm like day to day, I'm like a chef in the back of a Nando's or something, but every now and again something happens in the local community and I've got a particular set of skills that I can bring to bear. Things like that. But you can absolutely take it as a traditional campaign if you want to. I've run a couple of one-shots just in play testing, and again, it's kind of fun, particularly when you pair that up with rolling new characters. It's super fast, super easy to just have a new guy ready to go. And that, I think, in a way kind of ties in with that idea that you've had this glitch and you're suddenly connected to like several thousand people around you. What if you just kind of like hop into different people's stories as you go and play like one session with, I don't know, someone that's like reasonably well off, then you jump from them to someone that's like in the middle of a crisis, then you jump to someone else that's like trying to organize aid for people around them, and you kind of treat it more as a world building exercise rather than like a character building one in that sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. So we've got a bit of an idea about kind of the characters, and like you said, character creation, you can sit down and it's quite a quick process. It's not like a big complicated stat exercise. Mechanically, what's the core kind of mechanic and resolution in the game?
Yeah, so you've got core skills and you've got bonus skills. Core skills, there are just 4 of them, and that's going to determine the type of dice that you roll, and the bonus skills are going to determine how many you roll. So you're going to build up these kind of variable dice pools. At worst, you're going to have 1 die to roll, which is pretty bad. At most, you're going to have 3. So your bonus skills have different levels. If you've only got like the first level of a particular skill, then you only get to add an extra die if you're doing something very simple, very theoretical. So maybe you're trying to recall a particular piece of knowledge. Let's say somebody hands you a weapon and you kind of know how to use it. A first level skill might let you kind of figure out what the controls are on the weapon and things like that, but it's not going to make you better at shooting. Second level skills is where you get to add dice to practical checks. And then third level, you're adding 2 dice. However, if you are faced with a challenge and you really want to roll 3 dice, you really want to get the maximum chance of success, you can pair together 2 bonus skills. So if you've got, like, I don't know, let's say you're pretty good at driving and you're pretty good at shooting, well, suddenly you're really good at shooting while driving, which
sure,
a little odd, but it's so much fun when you just get like these weird combinations of things come together. It's like, oh, actually, my character's really good in this one specific situation. The way that you kind of deal with difficulty and stuff, though, you've got a couple of different options here. This is explained in the Game Master section. Anytime you roll a die, you're looking for a 4 or up as a success. 3 or under is a failure.
Okay.
So you're rolling somewhere between 1 and 3 dice. You can get somewhere between 0 and 3 successes. You can treat that if you want as like a binary success or failure. Say, oh, okay, you need to get 2 passes to win this challenge, whatever. But the kind of preferred way of doing it is to treat it like a progress clock. So say I'm jumping from one rooftop to another. And it's a really long way, so I need like 3 passes in total to get to the other side. And I roll and I get like 2. Okay, well, you don't land on the other side, but you manage to kind of grab on. And then you can make a follow-up check on another turn to try and pull yourself up. If you're in like a combat situation or anything that's running in turn order, then you're hanging onto the edge and the world starts moving around you, and suddenly you're reliant on your teammates to kind of come to your aid and things like that. And it's really trying to kind of pull on this idea of camaraderie and having kind of complementary skills and stuff like that. So maybe like the first guy gets the 3 passes in one go and clears the jump, and then you get the 2 and you're hanging onto the edge, and then their turn they run and grab you, and then your turn you can follow on and stuff like that. And I've found in playing this that it's a very quick system. It's very easy because there's very little maths involved. You're literally just counting how many 4s and up you got. You don't need to do any totals or anything like that.
No adding.
No maths whatsoever. No adding up. No burnout at the end of an 8-hour session or whatever. So it's very quick. It's very easy, but it also allows quite a lot of narrative flexibility within that. You've sort of got that built-in yes, but, or no, however aspect. You're not just, oh, you didn't roll high enough, you die.
Less just a locked door and got it. That makes sense. One thing I noticed in the game is obviously I could do this in my sleep. So you have an interesting relationship with sleep and the chip and things. So could you talk a little bit mechanically how food and rest works, and also NRAM sleep as well?
Yeah. Food is like really simple. If you want to heal, you need to eat a meal. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but it works. Write that down somewhere. You need to get a decent meal and a decent night's sleep if you want to heal naturally. And you heal slowly in this game. Like it's quite brutal, which is part of why I think it works quite well for you kind of drop into one session, then you have a little bit of a gap and some downtime, and then you go somewhere else. When you fall asleep, one of 2 things can happen. You can get a nice restful sleep and you wake up refreshed and you heal a few hit points. If you've got any what's called Nicto in your system, which is the drug that's used to make the NRAM sleep happen, instead of just getting a nice restful sleep, you slip into that NRAM sleep, which is where you can pick up on broadcasts. Well, not you can pick up on broadcasts, you will pick up on broadcasts. If you've got that chip in your head, you don't have a choice. If there's someone broadcasting a work stream that's going to take over your body, you're going to walk around in your sleep and do the job. As a player, as a character that experienced that glitch, you don't have quite the same response to this as most characters in the world. You are aware of it. And the general thing that goes with it is, oh, you get a nice pleasant dream that's going to placate you and let you go about your work in peace. No, not for you. You get what's called a dream guardian, which is like a manifestation of all of your fears that tries to prevent you from waking up. So again, there's a little bit of guidance about. Yeah. Hey, I said it was brutal.
Yeah.
There's a bit of guidance on sort of how to build these dream sequences, and suggested that you take scenarios that the players have faced while their characters are awake and start kind of cobbling them together into this kind of subconscious labyrinth. Take places that they recognize, take things that they've had to deal with, and jam them together into this dreamscape, and then drop in whatever this creature or presence is. It could be it could take the form of someone that they know. It could be some, I don't know, eldritch horror that haunts their nightmares. It could be their boss. Like the actual literal boss. Could be a boss fight. I don't know. And every time you fall asleep, it gets a little stronger. You add like a few extra rooms because the players will have found more stuff as they go through the world. The dream realm is going to get more convoluted and more labyrinthine every time. Now you might be thinking, well, why would I have Nikto in my system then? Why would I want that? That sounds terrible.
I can imagine that happening once and then being like, never again.
Well, the reason for that is you need it in order to unlock the powers that your chip grants you.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if you are just a regular character out in the world and you fall asleep, you've got a bit of Nikto in your system, it can do things like suppressing pain. It can do things like increasing your reaction speed. But if you're awake, you wouldn't have access to that. However, since you've experienced this glitch, you've got a little bit of control. So as long as you keep taking that drug, as long as you keep dosing yourself, you can use some of those powers. And then there's a roll that you've got to make to determine how close that brings you to falling unconscious.
Okay.
It's entirely possible to kind of gamble on, oh, I'm really close to falling asleep, but I really want to use this power. And like, maybe you'll get away with it. Or maybe you'll fall asleep in the middle of a fight and suddenly your body's been taken over and you might find your character is now like fighting on the opposite side. Or maybe you get like sort of lucky and you're just doing some random, you just start doing a bit of gardening or a bit of like tidying the streets up or something while there's a firefight going on, completely oblivious to it. And by default, you can't be woken up in that state.
Okay.
So it's like a kind of a non-death failure state.
Okay. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that idea because I think sometimes in a game you want there to be some consequence like death, because if you know that you're completely safe and can't die, then what is there to risk? But then obviously the negative of that is like, oh, my character's done, I'm just going to sit here while everyone else carries on playing. So yeah, I really like that idea of mechanically keeping people in the game but having kind of consequence. That's really nice. That's nice. So talking a little bit about the game, obviously we talked about the NRAM and you said it's kind of like modern day, but obviously there's a few technological differences. What sort of equipment and stuff are we going to get to play with in the game?
Aside from the MRAM chip, most of it is very much kind of modern day. It's wheeled vehicles, it's firearms, but there's also things like drones and stuff, which once upon a time would have sounded very futuristic, but nowadays it's just like, okay, you can get a drone. Cool. I've got one of those in my cupboard. Whatever. But if you want to push it in a slightly more sci-fi way, you've got scope to do that. You could. I'm working on an expansion at the moment, which is going to flesh out a little bit more of the kind of firepower that some of the law enforcement bring to bear and things like that. and I don't want to reveal too much just yet, but
okay,
it's a little bit more on the slightly sci-fi side, more kind of like a nod towards maybe flying cars and stuff like that, but they're not ready yet. It's like
got it.
you've got to be someone in a position of some power to even have access to this stuff, and even then it's a bit do you want to trust yourself in one of these things?
No, got it. Okay, but the version that's out now, because this is out on DriveThruRPG as we're talking,
yes,
and the link
indeed.
is on the screen or in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. So this is a more kind of grounded, modern day kind of version with things like that.
Yeah. There's a kind of a bit of a range of weapons. There's a couple of like old timey, like there's a revolver and a double barreled shotgun that you can maybe pull out of your granddad's attic or something if you're really desperate. And then some of the more kind of expensive high tech weapons that are longer range and pack a bit more punch, but good luck acquiring those legally.
Yeah, well, yes, this is the thing because it's set in Britain, so
it is
which affects what is available.
It does. Yeah. It's set in a slightly deregulated version of Britain, so
okay,
like there are guns, there is ammunition, you can get hold of that stuff, but it's not all over the place.
Yeah.
If you're starting out and you want to get hold of a firearm, it is literally going to be someone's ex-service revolver is going to be the first thing you manage to lay your hands on, if that.
No, got it. That makes sense. So talking about all the mechanics and the setting and kind of the characters, what sort of stories would we be telling in this world using the setting and in these abilities? So if I wanted to run a game, where would I kind of start with plotting out the kind of story and the narrative?
When players build their characters, they get these 4 little bullet points essentially. You can pick your own if you want, but there's also a table to roll on.
Yeah.
That gives you one of the big ones is an objective. So you might roll your character and say, "Oh, hey, I'm a delivery driver, but I desperately want to acquire some kind of political power." Okay, cool. That's like that's a character hook. It's not really a plot hook, but it's a character hook. Then once you start to bring in a few other characters, you kind of get a suggestion of what they want to do as a group, where they merge, where they divert, and things like that. Most of your characters are going to be very kind of like working class, very down on their luck, very oppressed is the word for it, really. I've kind of found that the best starting point really is just give some kind of crisis that just hits you basically at home. Okay, so maybe if you've got a contact that's like the debt collector that's coming after you, have them just turn up at the player's doorstep. If you've got even one of the more positive ones, it's like, oh, I've got a foot in at this company or whatever, like start them off with an interview, and then, oh, it's an interview for a massive tech company, and the tech company comes under attack from one of the factions that's described in the game. There's like a 2-page spread in the middle, which just kind of goes over some prompts for how to kind of build relationships with different factions in the world, whether they're quite sort of radical anarchist factions or more state-controlled government factions, and how those kind of two things interplay together. I think your session 0 in this game is going to be absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Because it's modern day, because you are dealing with economics and politics and factions that don't necessarily have your best interests at heart and don't have each other's best interests at heart. I think step 1 needs to be just sit down with your players and say, right, what's off the table? Like, what stories do you absolutely not want to touch? What's going to hit too close to home for you? But and then the flip side of that is, of course, well, what do you want to talk about? If you're drawn to a game that's set in the modern day and is dealing with like workers' rights and bodily autonomy and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a reason for that, right? There's got to be something that you as a group can kind of dig into and say, well, what is it that's actually kind of driving you to play this? And on the topic of like the different factions, there are some that are kind of environmentally focused. There are some that are kind of about medical interventions and informed consent and things like that. There are some that are very much about authoritarian power. And I think just kind of possibly one of your starting points should be just have a look at these, figure out which of these kind of speaks to you as a group, either as a positive influence or something to fight against, and take that as your plot hook and go, well, okay, how does this relate to my character? What would my character's motivation in this situation be? And kind of follow that where it leads. And just the whole time you just need to be mindful of like the other people at the table and what their experiences, what their real world experiences are and stuff like that. A little more so than if you're fighting dragons, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those kind of more dystopian, I don't know if horror is the right word, but like it's a darker sort of subject, and any of those type of games, it's always worth just checking that everyone at the table wants to play that type of game and agrees on the content. But yeah, so that's some great advice, and it's great that the character building kind of informs the direction and where it's going, because I think that's always more interested, because the players are more invested in it because they kind of they care about it and have said, hey, I'm interested in this. It makes your job easier. But that's some really great advice. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about I Could Do This in My Sleep. It's been really interesting to hear more about it. As I mentioned before, it is available now. So if you're watching or listening and any of this have been of interest to you, you can go download the PDF now on DriveThruRPG, because the best way to support indie tabletop creators is to buy their stuff if you can. But yeah, so that's I Could Do This in My Sleep. So thanks so much, Zachary, for coming on and sharing it with us. Before you go, I do have one final question though that I ask everybody, and that's if you have any recommendations for any other games.
I do. So another PocketQuest submission from this year, called Dream Job, which again it's a modern day, but a very grounded, quite thoughtful piece about unemployment. And while it starts out quite bleak, I don't want to spoil anything, but it does have a sort of an optimistic note to it as well. And it's a little bit of a journaling game, a little bit of a choose your own adventure. It's a solo piece.
Fab. I like that. So Dream Job, and that's available on DriveThruRPG as well. Indeed. Fantastic. That's a great recommendation. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We've come to the end of our time, so I'll say thank you very much and goodbye. And thank you to everyone who's watched and listened as well. We'll be back next week with another game to share with you. Thanks a lot. Bye.